Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Made You Book. My name's Gretchen and today I'm continuing my reading journey through the Booker Longlist. And today I'm going to be talking about If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. So this book is actually, it's interesting for a couple reasons for me. So first of all, this is a short story collection. Now they are interwoven, so that is what qualifies it as a potential book that would be eligible for the Booker. And the other thing is that this book was also nominated for a National Book Award for 2022. So this is not the first award exposure that this book has got, but I will mention that this book did not make it past the National Book Award long list. So I also read this book back in November of last year when it was up for the National Book Award, and I gave it 4 stars then, and I'm happy to say that it stood up and I was still able to give it, you know, the same solid 4 stars. So there wasn't one of those instances where you read something and you really like it and then you sit with it for a while, and then when you revisit it kind of loses some of its magic. I was actually very surprised and happy that this book held up for me after 9 months. So that is something that makes me happy about this book. So what is this book about? So basically, these are, as I mentioned, interwoven short stories. I believe there's 7 or 8 of them, so not too many. And basically it follows primarily the son of Jamaican immigrants. They have moved from Kingston to Jamaica. They do this in the 70s to get away from all of the political violence that's happening in their home country. And their younger son, his name is Trelawney, and then they also have an older son named Delano. Now, Delano was born in Jamaica and Trelawney was born in the States. And also Delano is your typical, in his father's eyes, Jamaican. He has a strong Jamaican accent. His skin is fairly dark, and he kind of associates Delano with his homeland, where Trelawney is born in America. And there is kind of like this unspoken resentment that he has for Trelawney because of this. It doesn't help that Trelawney is also much fairer complected, and he would, at the beginning, the very first story talks about how often his race or his nationality is being questioned. He gets asked the question all of the time, what are you? His skin is light enough that people are, struggling to understand, is he black? Is he white? Is he potentially Hispanic, being in the Miami area or the Florida area? So it's a lot about the father looking at one son as being the home that he longs for, because they didn't want to leave. They left because they were forced to for their safety. And then the juxtaposition of that son that he considers home and the other son that he almost feels is a representation of this place, America, that he resents and that he is not happy with. And I think that the stories they're so interesting. There are so many discussions that happen around fatherhood and the relationship between those fathers and the sons. There's also a competition between Trelawney and Delano. Delano has done really nothing to earn his father's love except being born in Jamaica and being raised a little bit there, where Trelawney feels like he has had to fight for his father's love from the very first day because he was born in a state or in the state of Florida or on American soil. So there is that resentment that his father has for him. Now, at the beginning, the very first story that we have, it kind of talks about the success that Trelawney has had in his life as far as, you know, being a good kid, being a responsible kid. He's very intelligent and he is going to be pursuing an education. And then you have the other son that's just kind of, you know, floating through life. He's not really doing anything that Trelawney would find to be, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Noteworthy in his life. And Trelawney has to just claw for everything. And he always seems to be going above and beyond to get his father's attention. And no matter what he does, that's just not something that ever comes to pass. So a lot of the stories kind of center around that. And I just found it to be, you know, very fascinating how you could have two sons and just inherently treat them differently just based on the soil that they were born on. And I also think that it's interesting how we as humans that are in situations like that, we do so much to gain the love and the respect of those people that treat us badly for no reason. Like, Trelawney didn't ask for any of that. He didn't do anything wrong, but his whole life has just been a challenge trying to get acceptance from his father. And you know, it's very interesting, and it's very sad, and it's such a common thing that so many people go through. And I think that Jonathan Escoffery did a beautiful job of representing that. And there's a lot of symbolism throughout these short stories as well. They are kind of set in the backdrop of some of the major hurricanes that have happened in the Florida area. The first one specifically is Andrew, and it just kind of represents that tumultuousness that is happening. And I think that it's just a really appropriate metaphor for just how Trelawney feels his life is going, trying to get that acceptance of his father, and also having a contentious relationship with his brother. Now, these are all interconnected short stories. So as we move from story to story, the narrative changes. So one thing that I found very interesting about this book is that the author definitely takes liberties as he's going or moving from story to story. So we have some that are in first person, we have some in third person, and there are actually pieces of certain stories where it's second person and he's talking directly to us, the reader. So anytime there is moments of second person narration in a book, I'm immediately intrigued by that. I find it to be very just captivating because it pulls you in, and it almost makes you not just the reader of the book on the pages, but it also kind of makes you a bystander. Like, you're physically there watching all of this play out, as opposed to just, you know, reading the story on the pages. There were a couple of stories that were, it was kind of like, I won't say that it was evenly distributed. This book was definitely more Trelawney heavy as far as the narration goes, but there were a few stories that were from the perspective of his brother and then his father. And then there was also a very interesting story about one of his cousins. And I honestly, of all of the stories, even though I loved all of the Trelawney-based stories, I wanted so much more from the story about the cousin. And his name is escaping me at the moment, but he had a very interesting story. Cookie, his name was Cookie. And he had a very interesting storyline with his own father. And so you had the original stories with Trelawney and the, him fighting for his father's love. And then you have this other story with Cookie and his father, where his father is abandons him, and he never really grew up with a father. So Trelawney and Delano, they at least had their father in their lives, whereas Cookie did not, and he had to go seek that out. And once again, it's a son seeking out his father's love. And unfortunately for Cookie, this has way different impacts on his life than, say, Trelawney and Delano. Although, Trelawney and Delano are not, they are not excluded from traumas. Cookie's story is definitely something that was very, almost disturbing. The very last couple paragraphs of that particular story just had me shocked on how raw and how just terrible some people can be. And I think that as far as all of the stories go, that was probably the one that punched me in the gut the most emotionally. Couple other things about this book, because it is interconnected short stories, there were a couple things that if I had my way, I would have had the author do them a little differently. And I understand the reasons why some of these things had to happen, but as you're moving from short story to short story, you kind of get these gaps in time, and there are things that you pick up with the next story and you have no explanation of how we got to that point. There are so many life-changing things that happen between the stories, and we as readers never really get the answers fully as to how we got to that place. So for example, Trelawney, in one of the stories of him, it talks about him going to school in the Midwest. So as I mentioned before, he was very intelligent and he was ambitious as far as making something of himself. And he goes to college, and you think that we have this boy that is going to college and he's trying to make something of himself, and that's going to pan out. And then we fast forward to another story and he is not in the best place, and you kind of wonder, what happened between college and that next period of time that led up to that. So I personally feel like there were so many gaps, and I really would have liked them to be closed. And I understand how difficult that would be for the format of a short story. So what I'll say, and what's kind of preventing me from giving this a higher, ranking within how I'm gonna rank my Booker books, is that I personally wish that this would not have been short stories and that the author would have just wrote a cohesive novel, and including all of those different gaps in time to kind of close the story. I think that that would have been much more impactful for me. And I think that as I know, personally, a lot of people are upset with the fact that this is technically a short story collection. And I just don't necessarily understand the logic behind why the author thought that this would be best as short stories, when I honestly, truly think that this would have made an amazing kind of sprawling family drama novel. So that's like that's one of my, main critiques. And also I would have loved the story that I mentioned about Cookie. That just seemed, although that was probably my favorite story of the whole book, it just seemed kind of very out of place and just kind of like it was thrown in there. It didn't really seem, everything was about Topper, who was the father of Trelawney and Delano. All of the other stories focused on those three. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of this book, you have this, random cousin that just comes into the picture and has an entire story dedicated to him. Now, granted, that story did fall in line with the theme, but it just seemed very, I don't know. It was just kind of like those one of these things is not like the other kind of situations. And what I would really have loved is for Escoffery to actually take that story of Cookie and make that into its own like novella or even long form novel as well. So, but all in all, at the end of the day, I really did enjoy this. I think that a lot of people, I have a feeling that this is going to be polarizing for a couple reasons. Like I said, mainly because of the, what's the word? I guess the controversy of it being short stories when, typically the Booker is novel based. And I think that there are a lot of people that feel like there was a potential book out there that got looked over and it really should have taken the spot of this. But I personally think that it has every right to be here. And I haven't read, this is only the fourth book that I've read from the list. So I don't have enough of those books under my belt yet to make a determination of what my short list is going to look like. But I am kind of leaning toward this potentially being on my short list, if not necessarily for the content of the story. I personally just think like the Booker judges are really trying to do something different this year. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like they have a point to prove with this year's prize. And like that to me has been very evident so far with kind of the polarizing long list in general and kind of how different a lot of these books are. I mean, I've read 4 books so far and they're all to me like completely different and they completely stand on their own. I don't feel like there's a lot of similarities between them. And I think that in coming up with a long list that they did, the Booker definitely has something to say this year. And I would not be surprised if one of those things is that interconnected short stories can be prize-winning literature. So we'll see what happens. So I'm trying to debate what book I'm going to read next. I think I'm leaning toward In Ascension, so that will likely be the next review that I do. I'm really curious to see how you guys felt about this book, if you liked it, if you didn't, if you think that it's fair for a collection of short stories to even be on the list. Leave your comments below on all of those, and yeah, we'll see you for the next video. And I hope that if you are reading the Booker Longlist, that you're enjoying everything that you read, and we'll see you for the next video. Thanks. Bye, guys.